My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how my life nearly unraveled. It's odd how quickly things can spiral beyond control when you least anticipate it, and how someone you once trusted can suddenly seem like a stranger. The beginning was deceptively simple. My husband, Michael, and I had been married for 8 years. We lived in a beautiful home, enjoyed successful careers, and shared our lives with Max, our adored golden retriever who was like a child to us. Yet, like any relationship, ours hit a rough patch. While still together, we had grown emotionally distant. Michael's long work hours left me feeling neglected, invisible, as if I were vanishing within my own home. I didn't grasp my vulnerability until John entered the scene. John, Michael's best friend, was a regular presence in our lives and often visited our home. The two of them played basketball together, and the three of us frequently shared meals, discussing everything from life to sports to work. But over time, my connection with John began to shift. At first, it wasn't intentional. We'd share jokes, laugh a bit too hard, and gradually, I started looking forward to John's visits. Our seemingly innocent conversations grew more personal. We'd confide in each other about life's frustrations, and soon I was telling John things I hadn't even shared with Michael. I'll admit, the attention was flattering. John noticed the small details, my new haircut, the way I dressed. Things Michael had long since overlooked. It felt good to be noticed again, to feel significant. Yet, I convinced myself it wouldn't go beyond that. Or so I thought. Then, one Friday evening, everything changed. Michael was working late again, and John dropped by to help with some house repairs. Max, as usual, was thrilled, bouncing around and wagging his tail at John's arrival. Everything seemed normal, but there was an unfamiliar energy between John and me. It was in his smile, the way his hand brushed mine when passing a tool. We laughed while fixing a cabinet in the kitchen, but an underlying tension was building. It was subtle, yet undeniable. Afterward, we settled on the couch with Max between us, watching a random TV show. The air felt charged, as if something inevitable was about to happen, but neither of us made a move. And then it happened. I can't quite explain it. One moment we were sitting there, and the next, John's hand was on mine. It wasn't forceful, nor was it purely friendly. It was something else entirely. I should have pulled away. I should have stood up and asked him to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I allowed it. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through me, and for a brief moment, I ignored the consequences. My mind went blank, and all I felt was the heat of his hand on mine. Max, lying at our feet, shifted slightly, sensing something amiss. But then reality hit hard. The front door unlocked. My heart skipped a beat as Michael entered, oblivious to what he had just interrupted. John quickly withdrew his hand, and I leapt from the couch, guilt coloring my cheeks. It all happened in a flash, yet the tension was palpable. "Hey, I'm home," Michael said casually, placing his keys on the table. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I blurted out, my voice betraying me with its high pitch. "We were just watching TV." John stood as well, clearly as uncomfortable as I was. "Yeah, I was just about to head out," John murmured, avoiding Michael's gaze. Michael either didn't notice the awkward tension or was too exhausted to care. He approached Max, giving him a gentle pat, and for a fleeting moment, I hoped we were in the clear. Perhaps Michael hadn't picked up on anything. Maybe this could just fade away, never to be mentioned again. But deep down, I knew better. Something had changed between John and me, something that couldn't be undone. We hadn't crossed any physical boundaries, but emotionally, we were teetering on the brink, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead terrified me. As John left that night, he gave me a look that mirrored my own feelings. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and it dawned on me that I was in way over my head. The days that followed were a haze of confusion and remorse. I couldn't shake thoughts of John, his touch, his presence, the way he made me feel seen. Yet each thought brought a wave of guilt. Michael hadn't done anything wrong. He was a good husband, albeit distracted and tired. He didn't deserve what was happening behind his back. I tried to dismiss it as a fleeting lapse, nothing more. But no matter how much I wanted to bury it, John was always there. He'd send casual texts, asking how I was or how Max was behaving. Not overtly flirtatious, but the underlying message was clear. He hadn't forgotten that night either. I knew I should have ignored him, but I didn't. The truth was, I craved the attention, and that realization made me despise myself even more. Each reply felt like I was playing with fire, yet I couldn't stop. The situation reached a boiling point when Michael suggested inviting John over for dinner. He mentioned it had been a while since we all spent time together, and I couldn't object without arousing suspicion. So I plastered on a smile, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was a mess. The dinner was awkward, at least for me. Michael and John were their usual selves, laughing, discussing sports, and sharing work stories. But I was elsewhere. Each glance from John felt like he could see right through me. And every smile from Michael made me feel like the worst person in the world. After dinner, we moved to the living room, with Max following as usual. John took a seat on the couch, and I hesitated before sitting beside him, maintaining a safe distance. Michael was in the kitchen, cleaning up, blissfully unaware of the tension between John and me. Then, in a moment I'll never forget, Max jumped onto the couch between us, just like the night before. He wagged his tail, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing. John chuckled, reaching over to pet him, and for a brief moment, his hand brushed against mine again. It was like déjà vu, but this time I pulled away instantly, my heart racing. I couldn't continue like this. I stood abruptly, startling both John and Maximum. "I'm going to help Michael in the kitchen," I stammered, my voice shaky. I needed to escape. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me under the weight of my guilt. John remained silent, simply nodding with an unreadable expression. In the kitchen, I found Michael drying dishes, humming softly to himself. He seemed so content, blissfully unaware of the emotional turmoil unfolding behind his back. I watched him for a moment, and the guilt hit me like a freight train. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Hey, can I talk to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael turned to me, his smile fading as he caught sight of my troubled expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched in his voice. I hesitated, my mind racing with indecision. Should I lay bare the truth and risk shattering everything we had built together? As I stood there, gazing into his worried eyes, I realized I couldn't do it, not now. The truth would devastate him, and neither of us was ready for that kind of upheaval. "Nothing," I lied, forcing a smile. "I've just been feeling a bit off lately. Work's been stressful." Michael visibly relaxed, relieved by my explanation. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" he said, enveloping me in a reassuring hug. "I'm here for you." His embrace felt like a lifeline, anchoring me back from the precipice. In that moment, I resolved to end whatever was happening with John. I couldn't keep risking everything for something that wasn't worth it. But fate had other plans. The following day, I texted John, insisting we needed to talk. I intended to be clear, this had to end. I wasn't going to jeopardize my marriage for a fleeting attraction, no matter how intense it felt. John agreed to meet, but instead of suggesting a public place, he asked if he could come over when Michael wasn't home. Against my better judgment, I consented. When John arrived, Max greeted him with his usual enthusiasm, oblivious to the underlying tension. I led John into the living room, determined to have a serious conversation and set firm boundaries. I needed to end this before it spiraled further. But John had different intentions. As soon as we sat down, he leaned in closer than I anticipated, his eyes fixed on mine. "Rachel, I can't stop thinking about you," he confessed, his voice low and earnest. My heart raced, but I shook my head. "John, this is wrong. We can't do this. I love Michael." "I know," he replied, reaching for my hand again. "But I can't help how I feel." I pulled my hand away, standing to put distance between us. "This has to stop. We can't keep doing this." John stood too, frustration evident in his expression. "Rachel, you feel it too. I know you do." Before I could respond, the sound of the front door unlocking sent a surge of panic through me. Michael was home early. I hadn't expected him for another hour. John froze, his eyes wide with shock. I heard Max barking excitedly from the hallway as Michael entered. My heart pounded as I realized the precarious situation we were in. There was no way to explain this without it looking incriminating. Michael walked into the living room, his face brightening at the sight of me, only to darken when he noticed John. Confusion and suspicion clouded his features. He glanced between John and me, his brow furrowing. "What's going on?" Michael asked, his voice cautious yet sharp. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The guilt was overwhelming, and I knew there was no way to explain this without it sounding like what it was, a betrayal. John, sensing the tension, quickly spoke up. "I was just leaving," he said, his tone overly casual. "I came by to check on Maximum." Michael's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched in his gaze. "Why would you need to check on Max when Rachel's home?" The room fell silent, and in that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what had been set in motion. Anna wrapped the thick woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the dancing shadows created by the lamplight in her living room. Her home had transformed into a peaceful sanctuary since her husband, Tom, had passed away, leaving her with seemingly endless hours of solitude. Her daughter, Sarah, frequently called, her voice tinged with concern. "Mom, you're spending too much time alone. It's not healthy," as Sarah had remarked during one of their recent conversations. Anna understood her daughter's worries, but in truth, she didn't mind being alone. After years of companionship, she had settled into a rhythm that was now disrupted. Sometimes, the silence felt soothing, like a gentle embrace around her memories of Tom. But at other times, it gnawed at her, leaving her feeling empty and restless. One bright Saturday afternoon, Sarah showed up at Anna's door with a surprise. A small, scruffy dog from the local animal shelter. His fur was a soft mix of browns and blacks, and his eyes were dark and soulful, carrying a kind of gentle understanding that Anna couldn't quite explain. "Mom, this is Max," as Sarah introduced him, her smile warm and encouraging. "He needs a home, and you need a friend." Anna's initial reaction was hesitation. She wasn't sure she needed, or even wanted, the responsibility. Yet, as she gazed into Max's eyes, she felt an inexplicable pull. She couldn't refuse. In the days that followed, Max settled into her home with ease, curling up by her feet as she read, trotting alongside her as she moved from room to room, and wagging his tail when she spoke to him, as if he truly listened. Talking to Max was easy. Initially, she shared light, casual remarks with him, comments about the weather or passing thoughts. Gradually, her words grew deeper, her emotions spilling out in ways she hadn't expressed to anyone since Tom. She recounted stories of her youth, her adventures, and her dreams. She even spoke to him about Tom, sharing their memories together as if Max could comprehend the love and loss she felt. On one particular night, the anniversary of Tom's death, Anna found herself unable to hold back the surge of emotions that had been building throughout the day. The house felt unbearably empty, filled only with the quiet ticking of the clock and the distant rustle of the wind through the trees outside. She was weary of the constant ache, the tears that seemed unending. Max, sensing her despair, leapt onto the couch beside her, nudging her hand with his cold nose. She looked down, her fingers instinctively reaching for his fur, feeling its softness beneath her hand. He rested his head on her lap, his gaze steady and warm. It was as though he could see into her soul, understanding her sadness in a way no one else had. For a brief, haunting moment, Anna felt something shift between them. She couldn't quite describe it, an invisible connection, an understanding that transcended words. It was as if Max offered her a comfort that surpassed anything she'd ever felt from a person, and in that quiet moment, she allowed herself to lean into it. "You're a good boy, Max," as she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion as she stroked his ears. He didn't respond like a human would, yet there was something undeniably reassuring in his presence, a silent promise that he was there for her in ways that went beyond the ordinary bond between a person and their pet. As days turned into weeks, Anna found herself looking forward to each morning, waking up to see Max curled at the edge of the bed where Tom used to sleep. She reached out to him, finding a small sense of comfort in his warm body beside hers, as though he was filling a void she hadn't realized existed. She didn't question it, she simply accepted it. She began to notice subtle changes in Max as well. He followed her everywhere, more like a shadow than a pet, his eyes watching her every move. Whenever Anna shifted in her chair, Max would immediately rise, ready to accompany her, his gaze unwavering and attentive. It was as though he was finely tuned to her very essence, responding to her moods with a sensitivity that was both comforting and slightly unsettling. One night, as Anna prepared for bed, Max followed her into the bedroom as usual. But instead of settling at the foot of the bed, he jumped up beside her, sitting next to her on the mattress, his dark eyes fixed intently on her. She chuckled softly, trying to dismiss the strange tension she felt. "Max, what are you doing here?" she asked, reaching out to pat him. Yet, he remained still, his gaze holding an intensity that caught her off guard. A strange flutter stirred in her chest, a mix of surprise and something she couldn't quite name. The way he looked at her, unblinking and almost expectant, evoked a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of being truly seen, as if he understood her in ways that went beyond mere companionship. The logical part of her mind dismissed it as loneliness, a desperate need for connection in her solitude. Yet, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the sensation that something beyond her understanding was happening. "Good night, Max," as she whispered, pulling the blankets around her, trying to ignore the peculiar ache in her heart. But as she lay in the quiet darkness, she felt his warm presence beside her, grounding and comforting her in a way she hadn't felt since Tom. It wasn't until she drifted off to sleep that she allowed herself to admit that perhaps she needed Max more than she had realized, and that his companionship was filling an emptiness that had been growing within her for years. As the days passed, filled with Max's silent loyalty, Anna began to wonder if her daughter was right. Maybe Max wasn't just a pet. Perhaps he was the friend she had been searching for, a companion who, in his own mysterious way, understood her in ways no one else ever could. Anna's mornings settled into a predictable routine, with Max shadowing her every step. Over time, she began noticing the subtle yet unsettling ways he seemed to be changing. It started with the way he looked at her, his gaze carrying a weight and intelligence that felt almost human, as if he were silently conveying something deeper than simple companionship. His presence was undeniably comforting, yet there were moments when it felt slightly eerie, a reminder of how much she had come to depend on him. It wasn't just his gaze that seemed altered. Max's behavior grew progressively uncanny. One afternoon, while Anna sat alone in the kitchen, a sudden wave of sadness washed over her as she thought about Tom. She hadn't uttered a word, hadn't even made a sound, yet Max appeared by her side almost immediately. His eyes studied her intently, and he pressed his head against her hand with a sensitivity that transcended instinct. It was as if he sensed the exact depth of her sorrow, his presence a balm she couldn't quite explain. As the day wore on, Max's attentiveness began to verge on the obsessive and unwavering. He would sit by the door while she was in the bathroom, and every time she moved to another room, he would follow, waiting for her to settle before positioning himself at her feet. Whenever she looked at him, his eyes never wavered, always watching, always aware. A strange new dynamic was forming between them, a silent connection that held her captive yet unsettled. One evening, after an especially lonely day, Anna sat quietly in her armchair, lost in thought. Max approached, resting his chin on Anna's knee, his eyes meeting hers with a purposeful intensity. Anna felt her breath catch as she returned his gaze, sensing a closeness that was almost overwhelming. She reached out to pet him, but her hand trembled slightly, unable to shake the feeling that their bond was anything but ordinary. The thought that Max might understand her pain in ways that seemed almost supernatural thrilled and terrified her. She had heard of animals forming deep connections with their owners, but this felt different, as if Max was filling a role in her life that extended beyond that of a pet. She found herself caught between relief and a creeping sense of unease, wondering if her loneliness was clouding her judgment. Late one night, as Anna lay in bed, she heard the soft padding of Max's paws on the floorboards. He entered the room and paused by her bedside, watching her intently before curling up on the floor beside her. Yet, instead of settling down, he continued to stare at her in the darkness, his eyes catching the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. The intensity of his gaze was impossible to ignore, and the sensation of being watched became so palpable that she closed her eyes to escape it. In the days that followed, she tried to maintain some distance, feeling the need to re-establish boundaries. She began leaving him outside her bedroom door at night, gently closing it and telling herself it was for both of their sakes. But each time she did, she could hear him softly scratching at the door, his quiet whines filling the silence, reminding her of his longing to be close. During a phone call with Sarah, Anna felt compelled to share her concerns. Max has been different lately, as she began, hesitating as she searched for the right words. Different how, Mom? Sarah's voice was filled with concern. "He seems to know things he shouldn't," Anna replied, her voice wavering. "It's as if he can read my mind. I know it sounds silly, but sometimes I feel like he understands too much, that he's watching over me in a way that's more than a dog should." Sarah chuckled softly, trying to ease her mother's worries. "Mom, you've just gotten used to him being there. Maybe it's just your imagination running wild because he's your only company." Anna nodded along, but deep down, she sensed there was more to it. She had lived long enough to recognize intuition, and her instincts told her that her relationship with Max had ventured beyond the ordinary. Still, she pushed the thoughts away, rationalizing them as a symptom of her isolation, a trick of the mind. Despite her efforts to dismiss her feelings, the unease only grew. One chilly evening, she sat down to dinner and, as had become a habit, set a small plate on the floor beside her for Maximum. As she ate in silence, Max remained by her side, but this time he didn't touch his food. Instead, he simply watched her, his eyes never leaving her face. The intensity of his gaze made her feel as though he was scrutinizing her, perhaps even judging her. "What is it, Max?" she murmured, forcing a smile to mask her growing discomfort. But Max didn't respond as he usually did. He merely continued to stare, his expression unreadable. Anna felt a shiver crawl up her spine, an irrational fear brewing within her as she realized she was beginning to feel more like his companion than his owner. Her nights became restless as her mind replayed the moments she shared with Max, trying to unravel the mysterious bond between them. One evening, she was jolted awake by a dream where Max was more than just a dog, a presence that wielded a powerful influence over her emotions and thoughts. She awoke in a cold sweat, heart racing, struggling to dismiss the unsettling images. As if sensing her distress, Max climbed onto the bed beside her, resting his head on her shoulder. She froze, her body tense as his warmth seeped into her skin, both comforting and unsettling. He nudged her cheek with his nose, gently reminding her of his presence. As she gazed into his eyes, she felt an inexplicable connection, something that transcended words and logic. Anna's internal conflict grew sharper with each passing day. She found herself slowly surrendering to the bond she shared with Max, even as her rational mind urged her to set boundaries. Each attempt to distance herself only brought back the loneliness, gnawing at her resolve and pulling her back toward him. Max was no longer just her pet. He had become her confidant, her companion, her solace in a world that seemed to grow darker with each passing year. Reflecting on their time together, she couldn't ignore the persistent feeling that her connection with Max mirrored something deeper within her, a yearning for companionship so profound it chilled her. It was as if she had woven herself into something surreal, something beyond tangible reality. One cold winter morning, Anna decided to take a walk in the nearby park, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. With Max leashed, they ventured out, the quiet crunch of snow beneath their feet the only sound breaking the silence. As they walked, she noticed how closely he stayed by her side, his gaze sweeping their surroundings before returning to her, as though guarding her from unseen dangers. Then, at a quiet bend in the path, Max stopped abruptly. Anna glanced down, puzzled by his sudden hesitation. He stared into the distance, ears perked, body tense. She followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just the empty stretch of trees lining the path. Before she could react, Max leaned against her leg, pressing close, his warmth grounding her even as a strange chill settled over her. In that moment, Anna felt a clarity she hadn't before, a sudden understanding that Max had come to mean something beyond friendship. She didn't know whether to welcome it or fear it, but she knew, deep down, that she could no longer deny the connection they shared. That evening, as they sat together on the couch, Anna reached down to stroke Max's fur, feeling the familiar softness beneath her fingertips. His eyes met hers, and in that quiet, dimly lit room, she allowed herself to accept the truth of her feelings. She had crossed a line, a boundary she hadn't realized existed until it was far behind her. For the first time, Anna felt a surge of panic, realizing that her relationship with Max had grown into something beyond her control, something both comforting and daunting. She knew she couldn't keep ignoring it, yet the fear of losing him kept her silent. As the shadows deepened around them, Anna felt trapped between two worlds, the comforting safety of Max's presence and the unsettling truth of her dependency. She had to make a choice, but the thought of moving forward without him filled her with a dread she couldn't shake. As winter settled in, the days grew shorter, casting a grey, somber light over Anna's quiet town. Inside her home, the world felt smaller, and her life seemed to revolve entirely around Maximum. His unwavering loyalty filled the spaces that had once echoed with loneliness, his presence constant and powerful. Yet the comfort she drew from him had shifted, evolving into a dependency she struggled to understand. Max's behavior became more intense. His silent watchfulness felt less like companionship and more like observation, his eyes following her every move as though he was studying her. Anna tried to distract herself by resuming old hobbies, like knitting and reading, and calling Sarah more often. But each time she attempted to create a sliver of space, Max's loyalty tethered her back, his silent gaze making her feel as though her actions were being judged. It was an odd, unsettling feeling, one she hadn't noticed at first but now found unmistakable, a thread connecting them in ways that were both comforting and confining. Max no longer lingered at the edges of her life. He was fully embedded in it, a part of her routine, her thoughts, her emotional core. Though she hated to admit it, she found herself relying on him in ways she'd never relied on anyone before. One evening, as she prepared dinner, Anna sensed Max's gaze lingering on her from across the room. She glanced over her shoulder, finding him watching with an intensity that felt almost accusatory. "Are you hungry, Max?" she asked, laughing nervously to dispel the tension she felt. But as she continued cooking, his eyes remained on her, unwavering. Her pulse quickened, a strange sensation of vulnerability creeping over her. It was irrational, she knew. He was just a dog, after all. But the way he watched her, so full of awareness, sent a shiver down her spine. Despite her unease, she brushed it off as overthinking. Yet, in the days that followed, her bond with Max continued to intensify, creating a complex blend of comfort and confinement. His ability to anticipate her every emotion, his almost supernatural attentiveness, became both a source of solace and a reminder of how deeply intertwined their lives had become. One snowy afternoon, as they sat together by the window watching the world turn white, Anna felt an urge to speak aloud, as if sharing her thoughts might ease the weight in her chest. "Sometimes I wonder if you understand more than you let on," as she murmured, reaching out to stroke Max's fur. He leaned into her touch, his eyes meeting hers with that familiar, piercing gaze. "It's like you know me better than I know myself." The days that followed were marked by a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to shift between them. Anna tried to create distance, leaving Max outside her bedroom at night, but his quiet whines and the soft scratch of his paws against the door pulled her back, making her feel as though she were abandoning him. Each time she opened the door, he would press close to her, his gaze filled with a silent insistence she couldn't ignore. One cold evening, Anna decided to take Max for a walk, hoping the fresh air might clear her mind. They wandered through the park, the snow crunching beneath their feet, the silence of the night broken only by the occasional rustle of branches. As they walked, she felt the weight of his presence beside her, both a comfort and a reminder of the unusual bond they shared. As they reached the edge of the park, Max stopped suddenly, his body tense, his gaze fixed on the distant line of trees. Anna followed his line of sight, her heartbeat quickening as a sense of her knees settled over her. She saw nothing unusual, yet Max's unwavering posture was protective, making her feel both safe and unnerved. For a moment, Anna felt a surge of fear, realizing she had allowed herself to become dependent on a presence she couldn't fully comprehend. Kneeling beside Max, her hand trembled as she reached out to stroke his fur. He looked up, his eyes filled with a warmth that eased her fear but didn't erase it entirely. "Max," as she whispered, her voice barely audible in the cold night air. "I don't know what I would do without you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, a confession she hadn't intended to make. As she spoke, Max leaned into her, his gaze holding a depth she hadn't seen before, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection they shared. In that moment, she understood that her dependency had crossed a line, yet she couldn't bring herself to break away. Returning home, Anna felt a heaviness settle over her. She knew her reliance on Max had become a crutch, a way to fill the void left by Tom's absence. She considered calling Sarah, reaching out to someone who might understand, but hesitated, unsure how to explain the depth of her attachment to a dog. Over the next few days, Anna tried to re-establish boundaries, allowing Max to follow her but refusing to let him sleep beside her or watch her every move. Each time she distanced herself, however, she felt a pang of guilt, as though she were betraying a bond that had become an integral part of her life. She knew she needed to regain control, yet each attempt felt like severing a lifeline. One evening, as she prepared for bed, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to change. Max watched from the doorway, his eyes filled with a silent plea, and she felt her resolve waver. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath to ignore the growing pull she felt toward him. In that moment, Anna realized her connection to Max had become more than just companionship. It was a way to fill the emptiness left by Tom's passing. She knew she couldn't continue down this path, yet the thought of letting go filled her with an unexplainable sadness. As she lay in bed, listening to the soft patter of Max's paws against the floor, she felt a surge of conflicting emotions: gratitude, fear, and a deep sense of longing. She didn't know what the future held, but she understood her relationship with Max had become something she couldn't easily define, something that both comforted and confined her. In the stillness of the night, Anna resolved to confront her feelings, to face the truth of her dependency and the unusual bond she shared with Maximum. She didn't know how she would do it, but she knew she couldn't keep ignoring the boundaries she had crossed. The time had come to face the reality of her connection with Max, no matter how difficult it might be. As she drifted off to sleep, a sense of resolve settled over her, a quiet determination to reclaim her life and rediscover herself beyond the bond that had both comforted and confined her. The journey ahead would be challenging, but Anna knew it was a path she had to take, not only for her own sake but for the sake of the relationship that had become her refuge. Yet, even as she resolved to create distance, the fear of loneliness crept back, the emptiness that had lingered in the shadows since Tom's passing. The thought of separating herself from Max felt like severing a lifeline, a vital connection that had sustained her through her darkest days. Yet, as time passed, her resolve was tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. She noticed subtle shifts in Max's behavior, his attachment intensifying to a degree that bordered on the obsessive. He followed her everywhere, his gaze sharp and focused, as if studying her with an intelligence she couldn't explain. One night, as she lay in bed, she awoke to find Max standing beside her, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. There was something almost human in his gaze, a quiet intensity that held her captive. Her heart raced, an inexplicable fear mingling with the comfort of his presence. For the first time, she wondered if she had crossed a line, if her dependency on Max had created something beyond her control. The realization struck her like a physical blow. She had allowed herself to become so entwined with Max that she could no longer distinguish where she ended and he began. The boundaries that had once defined their relationship had dissolved, leaving her vulnerable, exposed, and trapped in a dependency that felt both comforting and dangerous. Unable to sleep, Anna rose from bed and walked to the kitchen, hoping a glass of water would calm her racing heart. But when she turned back, she found Max standing in the doorway, his gaze steady and unyielding. She felt a surge of panic, a sudden awareness of how deeply he had embedded himself into her life, how she had come to rely on him as though he were her last tether to reality. "Max, you need to give me space," as she murmured, her voice trembling. But as she spoke, she felt the futility of her words, the weight of her own dependency bearing down on her. She knew that she had created this dynamic, that her loneliness and grief had shaped their relationship in ways that defied reason. In the days that followed, Anna attempted to distance herself, to reassert control over her life. She spent more time outside, reconnecting with Sarah, attending a local book club, and trying to rebuild the social connections she had neglected. But each time she returned home, Max was there, his presence a reminder of the bond that had both saved and confined her. The breaking point came one evening when Anna sat alone in her living room, the house filled with silence. Max sat at her feet, his gaze unwavering, reflecting the quiet intensity that had come to define him. She felt the weight of his presence, the way he seemed to fill the empty spaces within her, and she knew she had to make a choice. "Max," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you. You've been there for me in ways I never expected, in ways I can't even explain, but I can't keep relying on you like this." I need to find my own strength, my own way forward. You've been my rock, but I can't let you become my world. Max watched her, his gaze softening with a quiet understanding that seemed to acknowledge her words, accepting the boundaries she was trying to establish. She reached down, placing a trembling hand on his head, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her fingers, the quiet comfort he had provided in her darkest days. As she sat there, the weight of her decision settled over her, a quiet resolve to reclaim her independence, to find her own way forward without relying solely on Maximum. She knew the journey ahead would be challenging, that the loneliness she had tried to escape would resurface, but she was ready to face it, to confront the depth of her own grief and find a way to heal. In the days that followed, Anna gradually redefined her relationship with Max, allowing him to be a part of her life without letting him consume it. Allowing Max to be a companion, Anna found strength in reconnecting with old friends and in the laughter and warmth that came from human connection. She began to see Max for what he truly was, a loyal companion, a steadfast friend, but not a replacement for the human connection she had lost. One evening, as they sat together in the quiet warmth of her home, Anna felt a sense of peace settle over her. She looked down at Max, her heart filled with gratitude for the comfort he had provided and the bond they had shared. She knew their relationship had been unusual, that her dependency had bordered on the obsessive, but she had found her way back, rediscovered her strength, and reclaimed her life. "Thank you, Max," as she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You've been there for me when I needed you most. But now it's time for me to stand on my own." Max leaned into her touch, his eyes reflecting a quiet understanding, a loyalty that would never waver. In that moment, Anna knew she had found a balance, a way to cherish their bond without losing herself, a path forward that honored both her love for Max and her need for independence. As she sat in the stillness of the night, Anna felt a profound sense of closure, a quiet acceptance of the journey they had shared. She knew Max would always be a part of her life, a reminder of the strength she had found within herself, the resilience that had carried her through her darkest days. And as she drifted off to sleep, her heart filled with peace, Anna knew she had finally found her way home. In the days following her decision, Anna gradually felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. Though it wasn't easy, she began creating boundaries with Max, reorienting herself toward a balanced life that didn't rely entirely on his companionship. The silence in the house no longer seemed as oppressive, and she began filling her time with small activities she'd once enjoyed, reading new novels, experimenting with recipes, and even writing letters to friends she hadn't contacted in years. Max, sensing the change, appeared to understand and accept her boundaries, though he never strayed too far from her side. He no longer followed her every step, content instead to observe her quietly from across the room or to rest at her feet while she read. Anna felt gratitude in these small gestures of companionship, realizing she could love Max deeply without allowing him to consume her world. One afternoon, Sarah stopped by unannounced. She walked in to find Anna standing at the counter, rolling out dough, with Max resting peacefully by the window. The atmosphere was different, lighter, more grounded. Sarah noticed it immediately. "Mom, you seem better," she said, a smile spreading across her face as she watched her mother. "You seem like yourself again." Anna glanced up, her hands dusted with flour, and gave Sarah a warm, knowing smile. "I've been working on things, sweetheart," she replied. "It's been a journey, but I feel like I'm finding my way." They sat together in the kitchen, sipping tea while Max lay peacefully at Anna's feet. For the first time in a long while, Anna felt truly present, enjoying her daughter's company without the pressing need for Max's constant reassurance. She had rediscovered a part of herself she thought had been lost forever, a part that could enjoy companionship without depending on it for emotional survival. As they talked, Anna shared her experiences with Max, carefully choosing her words to convey the depth of their bond without revealing the extent of her past dependency. Sarah listened attentively, her expression a mix of understanding and relief. "I'm glad you found Max when you did, Mom," Sarah said gently. "But I'm even more glad to see you reconnecting with people. You don't have to go through this alone, you know. We're here for you." Anna reached over and gave Sarah's hand a reassuring squeeze, her heart warmed by her daughter's support. It was a reminder of the connection she had with people who loved her, who could fill her life with companionship and warmth that no pet, however loyal, could entirely replace. That evening, after Sarah had left, Anna found herself reflecting on her journey. She realized how easy it had been to fall into the comfort of Max's presence, how her grief and loneliness had driven her to seek solace in ways that blurred the boundaries between companionship and dependency. But she also understood that this experience had taught her a valuable lesson about resilience, about finding strength within herself rather than relying solely on others, whether human or animal. The following week, Anna took a step further in her journey by reconnecting with her old friends. She joined a local book club at the library, something she'd been too hesitant to do in the past. At first, the social interactions felt strange, and she found herself awkward and out of place among people who had kept in touch with each other over the years. But gradually, she began to enjoy the lively discussions, the laughter that filled the room as they debated plot twists and favorite characters. It felt refreshing, a reminder of the world outside her small, quiet home. Max continued to be her constant companion, but in a healthier, balanced way. He no longer felt like the only source of comfort in her life. Instead, he was a cherished friend who complemented her newfound social interactions rather than replacing them. Anna felt liberated by the shift, as if she had finally regained control over her life, her choices, and her emotional well-being. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace with Max at her feet, she looked down at him with a mixture of love and gratitude. She stroked his fur, her touch gentle and filled with appreciation for the companionship he had provided in her darkest times. "You've been such a good friend, Max," as she murmured, her voice soft but filled with warmth. "I am grateful for every moment we've shared. But I think I'm ready now to live, to find joy beyond these walls." Max looked up at her, his eyes calm and understanding, as if acknowledging the growth she had undergone. It was as though he knew that their bond had helped her rediscover herself, that he had been the companion she'd needed at a time when no one else could reach her. As winter began to fade and the first signs of spring appeared, Anna felt a renewed sense of purpose. She no longer dreaded the silence of her home or the memories that lingered in every corner. Instead, she embraced the quiet moments with Max as peaceful respites, balanced by her newfound friendships and the fulfilling activities she'd reintroduced into her life. One bright spring morning, Anna took Max to the park for a long walk, letting him lead her along the familiar paths. She watched as he bounded through the grass, chasing after fallen leaves with a lightness that mirrored her own newfound sense of freedom. She realized that she too was embracing life once more, shedding the burdens of loneliness that had weighed her down for so long. In that moment, Anna understood that Max had been a catalyst in her journey, a guide who had helped her navigate the depths of grief and solitude. Now, she was ready to face the world with open arms, knowing she had regained the strength within herself to move forward. As they walked back home, Anna looked down at Max, her heart filled with love and gratitude for the path they had traveled together. Their bond remained strong, but she knew she was no longer dependent on him to fill the emptiness within her. She had found balance, a way to cherish Max's companionship while embracing the richness of human connections that once felt so distant. Back at home, as she settled into her cozy armchair with Max resting by her side, Anna felt a sense of contentment she hadn't experienced in years. She realized the peace she now felt wasn't due to an escape from loneliness or dependency, but rather from an acceptance of her own journey, of the growth that had allowed her to reclaim her life. With a deep, steadying breath, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to savor the moment. She knew she had finally reached a place of understanding, a place where she could honor the past, cherish her companionship with Max, and embrace the future with hope and resilience. As the fire crackled softly in the hearth, Anna opened her eyes and looked down at Max, a gentle smile gracing her lips. She knew that no matter where life took her, she would always carry the lessons she'd learned, the strengths she'd found, and the love she'd shared with her loyal friend. In that quiet, peaceful moment, Anna felt truly whole. As spring blossomed into summer, Anna's life grew more vibrant, infused with the small joys she had rediscovered. Her days took on a new rhythm filled with laughter, social gatherings, and the gentle companionship of Maximum. The quiet desperation she'd once felt had been replaced by a contentment she could hardly recognize in herself, a peace that went beyond mere comfort into the realm of true fulfillment. Max remained by her side, his presence now steady, reassuring comfort rather than the lifeline he had once been. He settled into his role as her loyal friend, their bond as strong as ever, but no longer overshadowing her life. Their relationship transformed into one of mutual understanding, where each could exist freely without clinging to the other for survival. One sunny morning, as Anna prepared her tea, she glanced out the window to see Max sprawled lazily in the garden, basking in the warmth of the sun. The sight brought a smile to her face, filling her with a quiet happiness that needed no words. She stepped outside to join him, sitting beside him on the garden bench, feeling the soft warmth of the morning sun on her skin. As she sat there, Anna reflected on the journey she had taken over the past year. She thought about the dark days when loneliness had seemed all-consuming and she'd sought refuge in Max's silent, steadfast presence. She remembered the deep emotional bond that had formed, the moments of confusion and dependency, and the slow, painful process of untangling herself from those feelings. But above all, she felt grateful for Max, for her family, and for her own resilience, which had guided her through the depths of grief and helped her emerge stronger. The transformation wasn't just in her relationship with Max, but in her entire outlook on life. She had come to understand that companionship was meant to complement one's life, not replace the human connections that gave it true depth. Now, as she sat beside Max, she knew she was finally at peace, not because she had escaped loneliness, but because she had learned to face it without letting it define her. Later that week, Anna decided to host a small gathering at her home. She invited Sarah, a few friends from her book club, and some of her old neighbors she hadn't seen in years. The house filled with the warmth of laughter and conversation, a welcome contrast to the quiet solitude it had once held. Max moved happily among the guests, his tail wagging, clearly pleased to be part of the lively atmosphere. As the evening unfolded, Anna found herself sharing stories and laughing more freely than she had in years. She no longer felt like an outsider in her own life, but rather a part of a vibrant community supported by the people she had once kept at a distance. The joy of reconnect filled her heart, as she realized she had found a way to balance her love for Max with the richness of human relationships. After the last guest had departed, Anna sat alone in the living room, Max nestled comfortably at her feet. The silence was no longer daunting or empty. Instead, it felt peaceful, filled with the echoes of laughter and the warmth of cherished memories. She leaned down to stroke Max's fur, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey they had shared. "Thank you, Max," as she whispered, her voice soft with emotion. "You've been with me through it all. I wouldn't be here without you." Max looked up at her with his familiar warm gaze, his eyes reflecting the quiet understanding that had always defined their bond. In that moment, Anna felt as though he understood her gratitude, her love, and her newfound sense of freedom. In the weeks that followed, Anna continued to embrace her life fully, finding joy in the simple things she had once overlooked. She joined community events, took weekend trips with Sarah and her grandchildren, and even began volunteering at the local animal shelter, hoping to give back some of the love and companionship she had found in Maximum. Her heart no longer carried the weight of loneliness or dependency. Instead, it was filled with a gentle strength, a resilience that had grown from the trials she had faced. Max was no longer her sole comfort, but rather a beloved companion, whose presence enriched her life without defining it. She had found a way to cherish him while staying connected to the world around her, a balance that brought her a profound sense of peace. One bright morning in late summer, Anna decided to take Max for a walk through the park where their journey together had begun. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the path as they strolled side by side. She felt a deep contentment as they walked, knowing she had come full circle, from dependence to freedom, from loneliness to fulfillment. As they reached a quiet spot overlooking the lake, Anna sat down on a bench, watching the gentle ripples on the water, the reflection of the sky shimmering on the surface. Max settled beside her, leaning his head against her knee in a gesture of affection. She placed a hand on his head, stroking his fur gently, feeling the warmth of his companionship as a steady, comforting presence. In that serene moment, Anna understood that her life had changed irrevocably, not because she had found a way to escape her loneliness, but because she had learned to face it with courage. She knew she was no longer bound by the limitations of grief or dependency, that she had found a balance allowing her to love freely without losing herself. "Thank you, Max," as she murmured again, her words soft and filled with gratitude. "For everything." Max wagged his tail, his eyes closing as he leaned into her touch, and Anna smiled, feeling a quiet joy that filled every corner of her heart. She knew their bond would always hold a special place in her life, a reminder of the strength she had discovered within herself, the resilience that had carried her through the darkest days. As they sat together watching the world go by, Anna felt a sense of peace that went beyond words, a contentment that came from knowing she had found her way, with Max by her side as a loyal friend and companion. Her journey was far from over, but Anna felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, with a heart that was whole and a spirit that was free. As they walked back home, she realized she had finally found her place in the world, not in solitude or dependency, but in the balance between love and independence, companionship and self-discovery. With Max trotting happily beside her, she felt a quiet assurance that she was, at last, truly at peace. Anna understood that life would continue to present challenges and opportunities, but she was equipped with the resilience and wisdom gained from her experiences. She had learned to cherish the moments of connection, whether with Max or the people around her, and to find strength within herself. The path she walked was now one of her own making, filled with the richness of relationships and the joy of living authentically. Max remained a beloved part of her journey, a constant reminder of the growth and healing she had achieved. Together, they had forged a bond that would endure, not as a crutch, but as a testament to the power of love and loyalty. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over their home, Anna felt a deep contentment settle within her. She knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, ready to embrace the future with open arms and a heart full of gratitude. With Max by her side, she was confident in her ability to navigate whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that she was never truly alone.